Hi, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment
with Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Welcome to our show. As always, if you're returning, thank you for coming back. If you're new to this show, welcome to it. Please like, subscribe, and comment. This is the second part of a two-part episode that we did on the subject of video games. Randall and I are firmly in one camp, and we're hoping that somebody out here is in a different camp, and maybe through their comments, they will challenge our assertions. And I promise those people who do, we will do another episode. We will call you out by your name. We will at least embrace the argument that you're going to make against us. And you can ask Bob Tucker. We're more than happy to really do episodes based on people's responses, both in the positive and in the negative. We're not perfect people. But today, we're going to deal with a video game question that is, and I call it video games because I'm 54 years old. So when I was a kid, we called it video games.
I think it's a good term.
It's a good term, okay? I'm old man Corbell. You're younger than me, man.
10 years, only 10 years.
10 years, but boy, those 10 years really, that's the difference between Pong and Tetris. Anyway, are video games an entertainment or are they an art form? And what is the difference? And this question really even goes to the core of why the show is called Arts and Entertainment with Chris and Randall, and not just arts and just entertainment. So Randall, you've cultivated this question so much better because this is your topic. Please tell the audience what we're exploring.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking about video games as an art versus entertainment today, because we didn't originally set out to do that topic, right? But as we talked about the aesthetics of video games, which we covered in the first episode, we realized that, it goes to the heart. Talking about video games goes to the heart of what art is and what entertainment is, right?
Absolutely.
So how would you define art, Chris?
Well,
let's do the easy questions first.
It's an interesting thing because when you take philosophy in college, there's a section called philosophy of art. There is absolutely, I've never heard it, and it may exist, but not in most colleges, thing called the philosophy of entertainment. So the fact that art has an area of philosophy dedicated proves it's a nebulous definition that is open to great debate. But I think where we're really talking about is the difference between commercial art and fine art. And what is fine art? And fine art, commercial art is made by an artisan, and fine art is made by an artist. And I believe, in my subjective opinion, we talked about this enough that I think we're on the same page, it comes down to intent. And that I think an artist makes art to express something that he or she feels or believes or sees. And where there is a hope that the person who experiences the artwork gets to see or experience through the creator's own view, their primary goal is to express. I believe an artisan creates art trying to envision what that art will look like to the person who experiences, and they're less concerned about their own expression and more concerned about how you receive it. So if I am designing a couch, I might be thinking more about, well, what do I like in a couch? But more importantly, what would you, the prospective couch buyer, find inviting, warm, and comfortable? So I have to think about it from your point of view. And my intention isn't really to express anything more than what would you like? And how would this make your life better? Or how will this fulfill what you need? The functionality and the pleasure. Whereas if I was making a couch from, say, a Duchamp, right? It was a Duchamp ready-made. Please explain to the audience, because you hit this and I like this. How would Duchamp make a couch, Marcel Duchamp?
Well,
it's a ready-made.
Duchamp made this series of pieces called ready-mades, where he'd just take an everyday object and say, oh yeah, now it's art, and I'm signing my name to it. Right. So he would just go to a furniture store, buy a couch, and then sign it with his name and say, now that's a couch by Duchamp.
or he would write Armut, right?
Yeah, Armut, probably, yes.
Right. I mean, but that is the point, right? So,
Art is
or
whatever
even
the artist says it is.
right, and he
The
could have made a couch out
expression,
of potatoes and
right,
called it a couch.
right. But I would like to say, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's too early to say this in this discussion, but Duchamp kind of retired from art for a long time, like 25 years or so, and then at the end of his life, he revealed a work like that was like 20 years in the making, basically, right?
Yeah.
And it was Etant. I'm not good with French, so it's called Etant Donné, I think, and you can look it up on Wikipedia. But it's an amazing work. It's, I mean, Duchamp is a guy that tried to make the most minimalistic art possible, tried to question what art was, question the association of the art and the artist to the audience and all this. But his last work is a work that validates art itself, right? He makes a work where uh, it's a diorama, and the viewer is just swept up in a scene that is completely ambiguous and completely immersive, I guess you could say.
Right.
I
It's
mean,
a
it's
physical installation, right?
right. It's
I mean, you have to actually, there's three-dimensional objects.
there's a giant door. There's a giant
Right.
door and a keyhole, and you look through the keyhole and you see what looks like a completely realistic scene. And it is just, I mean, when I saw it personally at I think it's at the Philadelphia Museum or at a Philadelphia museum. And when I saw it, it was like an overwhelming experience, for me. I mean, it's like, it's in a darkened hallway. You think it's maybe like an exit or something, and you just walk in there and you see this giant wooden door, and there's this light going through the peephole, and you think, is this just like storage? Is this like a door to the outside? And you have to have the courage to go up to the peephole and look through it. And there you go. You see this completely photorealistic scene. I mean, it's a diorama. It's in three
So
dimensions.
there's a photorealistic scene inside the peephole?
Inside the peephole. That's right. I mean, when you look
But
at the people,
it's not what's actually physically present in front
it
of
is
you. It's
well, it is physically present. When you look through the people, the scene you see is life size and in three dimensions. I know exactly. I feel like I know exactly what Duchamp's trying to do. He's trying to make a scene that fools you into thinking it's real.
And the operative word is I think.
That's
Meaning
right.
you don't really know, right?
Don't really know.
In some sense, Duchamp, and there's a lot of great physical installation artists. There's an abstractionist from the 50s who I loved, and I wanted to look up his name, but you know what? It sucks when there's someone you like, you can't remember their name. So my point is, with Duchamp, is that you, the person experiencing the art, are not really being catered to. Duchamp is making his art. He's presenting you a world. It is immersive. It is dimensional. But at the day's end, only Duchamp really knows what Duchamp. There's a mystery. We'll never really know his intent. You could write papers. You could interview him. He might even lie and tell you this was my intent. And I know as someone who, as fellow artists, people have often said, Chris, it's something you wrote. What was that about? And sometimes I just don't want to tell them the truth. And I'll lie because it's just more convenient. So artists
It's
by
very
nature,
Warholian.
well, my mom's a painter as well. And sometimes I'll say, Mom, what inspired you? She's like, just that moment, something came across my mind. But I can see that even sometimes art is made subconsciously. And sometimes even the artist isn't consciously aware of why they were stimulated in that moment to intuitively feel themselves through a piece of music or a word or an action or a color.
Right.
And so what Duchamp is presented to you and it stimulates you is that you're feeling him feeling something, and he's trying to express whatever it is he's feeling, whether it's clear or not, does not know. But the Waldorf school, when they have their dolls, I cannot remember what the group behind the Waldorf is. They deliberately don't have definition on the doll because they want you to imagine what that face looks like. And I think that there is always a negative space in fine art between what the artist has made and what you, the interpreter of the art, has to fill in or just sit with. Whereas in commercial art, like an ad or a dime store thriller or an action movie, that ambiguity, that negative space just doesn't exist. You're clearly being told what to think and feel, or being presented with a very clear world from the author of that art form.
Exactly. I feel like I'm totally on the same page with you on this. I mean, yeah, so entertainment is you're trying to please the audience, right? I mean, and the perfect proof that this is the case is that works of entertainment are focus grouped and tested in front of audiences before they're officially released, right? I mean, this is true of movies. This is true of video games.
Well, even if you're just a stand-up comic, right? You're going to record your set. You're going to see what jokes landed, what jokes didn't. If you're a novelist, you're going to have an editor. And let's say you're a genre novelist and you're writing true crime fiction, not true crime. You're saying a mystery novel. Yeah, your editor is going to be like, oh, I solved that crime a little too easy, or this crime is a little too hard to follow.
Right.
Or a producer of a pop song, right? It's like, no, there's no hook.
Right. Well, I just want to say sometimes an artist will make work just for themselves, right? Where they're trying to express something they want to express, and with no outside interference. And that work becomes a piece of entertainment because audiences love it. And so sometimes works can cross over and be both art and entertainment. And I think it's fairly rare for that to happen.
Well,
but I think that
we praise them, right? We praise the Beatles. We praise Steven Spielberg. We praise. I have ads in in my apartment. Look, this is a photograph. It's a photograph by Bernard F. Iliers of Amsterdam from 1901, and it's just a photograph. He didn't build that architecture. He didn't do anything. He just made the framing. He just lensed it. He did what he had to do as a photographer to present it. And it could be a work of art. It could be an ad to come to Amsterdam. But whatever it is, it's in my apartment because I can find that negative space in which to have my own interpretation of what that means.
Do you this is interesting. Do you think a great piece of art has to have room for the audience's interpretation somewhere?
I think whether it was originally born as a pop song or was born as an atonal symphony, for it to transcend, well, atonal symphonies are art, sorry. For it to be a pop song or it to be this photo here, it has to transcend its original intent, which was to entertain and somehow speak to a universal thing of the human condition that the person who likes it can relate to, right? I mean, I'll pick on pop music because it's really easy. A lot of songs about a broken heart. Britney Spears songs to me about broken hearts are just kind of meaningless gobbledygook because they just sound like the hooks fall in the right places so you can dance. The Beatles, For No One, which is about a girl who moves on in a relationship. For whatever reason, he writes that line, in her eyes you see nothing, no sign of love that once was, that once was there. Cry for no one. Anyway, I'm not very bad with lyrics. My point is, in her eyes you see nothing, and I can I can vibe with that line. It may have been a song to just sell a record, but it connected with me. I think Star Wars. Let's pick on Star Wars for a second, right? Because Star Wars is probably one of the most influential pop films ever made. Certainly made a lot of money for George Lucas. Sold a lot of popcorn for movie theaters.
Right. But, well, can I talk about that?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I think Star Wars is a great example of what we're talking about, because George Lucas made a movie called, was it THX 1138?
Yeah.
Before he made Star Wars. And THX 1138 is really what Lucas wanted to make. He made the movie he wanted to make. In that movie, he made a movie of some futuristic faraway civilization where nothing made any sense to us, but it would make sense to the people inside that civilization, right?
Yeah.
And Lucas didn't put in any of the more entertaining elements that movies always put in, right? He just wanted to make a very serious science fiction movie about the very serious aesthetic subject he wanted to explore, and it bombed.
It bombed.
But then he said, I want to make THX 1138, but this time I'm going to make, I'm speculating here. But this time I'm going to make the movie and throw in every single entertaining element from every single movie I can think of. He put in like a
put in all the things
swing.
that he enjoyed, right? He enjoyed all the things that he thought were pop fun. Flash Gordon,
rope swinging, sword fighting, laser gun
Kurosawa
battles.
films, yeah, exactly. It was just a melange of all the pop cultural things, right? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, exactly. It's just he went down the list of every single entertaining element of every single pure entertainment movie he could think of.
But I would still argue it was still at the time independently made, on a shoestring budget, not issued by a movie company. It was his own script. He worked with a partner. It was his own casting choices, his own direction. The people he worked with, they were not, in 1976, when they worked on the film Star Wars, there was no film industry need to make another science fiction film. Science fiction movies were low-budget drive-in thrillers that were considered right next to horror films, but less profitable than horror films. Because Planet of the Apes already tanked, no one wanted to do science fiction. It was just, he was doing it. It was like a garage band song. But what happens is, and this is a good way of getting into video games, is it does so insanely well. And you're seeing it now also with superhero movies and other genres, that the film and entertainment industry said, no, we're taking this independent film idea away, and we're now going to make it into commercial art. We're going to make it into toys. We're going to make it into comic books. We're going to make it novelizations. We're going to make it into sequelizations. And, of course, even video games.
Well, I would just want to say that I think Lucas was way more prescient than you're implying. I think that Lucas, I mean, there's a famous example of Lucas maintaining the toy rights to the movie, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. He was wise enough to know that.
Well, I think Lucas knew he was trying to make popcorn entertainment with Star Wars, but I want to say about the first Star Wars, because we've discussed this outside of the show, right, Chris? The first Star Wars is spectacular, right? I mean, it combines those insular science fiction elements of THX 1138 with popcorn entertainment.
Right, and to be really clear, I'm saying that Star Wars is both a work of cinematic art and also a work of entertainment. That it does a lovely job of twining the two.
Exactly, and Lucas learned his lesson with the THX 1138, right? Because audiences, most audiences want to have fun, right? They don't. I mean, if you're going to make like a very serious piece of art, I mean, you're going to have a very small audience.
He did have something philosophically in this concept of the Force and the concept of Luke Skywalker's arc. He had something that he wanted to express that was unique to him. Definitely. He had a vision. He has a philosophy. He has something. He hopes you get all of what he is saying, but he is willing to accept that you may not get all of what he is saying, and that's fine. His job is not to make you understand what the Force means. Actually, the Force, up until the late 90s, no one really knew what the Force was. And people would walk around in 77 with these buttons that just said, "May the Force be with you," because they kind of liked that Lucas had given enough ambiguity in his artwork with this concept of a Force to allow people to fill in the space for themselves, which is something you do see in fine art and you rarely see in commercial art.
Well, I don't know. We might disagree on this ambiguity subject. I do think that when you're talking about like fine art and great art, it is the reason it's great is because there is a certain element of the artist being able to transport their own mind into your mind, you know, and you feel a connection. I mean, that's
absolutely.
yeah. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but I guess we should go on to the next subject. I mean, we want to discuss video games as an art form, right?
Well, and to jump off that, I do want to insist that ambiguity is one of the key distinctions between fine art and where video games, in my opinion, have to fall short. Because I don't think video games are inherently designed to promote ambiguity, or at least not commercial video games.
Why do you think
the majority of video games?
Why do you think ambiguity is such an essential piece of fine art, of great art?
Ambiguity, which I just said before, is that negative space, is that part of the art that does not fully declare itself, and therefore you, as the person experiencing the art, have to make one of two choices: either interpret the art to the best of your abilities, or to accept that you don't know what's going on and just sit with the mystery and accept the mystery either as something you will one day get or never get, but realize that that part of it is just there, hanging out there in your conscious and subconscious. Whereas commercial art has no ambiguity, because as someone who's trained, and you're trained as people in screenwriting, we know they don't, with at least commercial screenwriting, I know we're really going around on this a lot. Clarity, right? And to me, video games are incredibly clear because you know who the bad guy is, or you at least know what a bad guy might. They're iconic characters, right? They're archetypal. It sells archetypes. It sells a moral universe where there's good, there's evil, there's a little gray, but it's still on a spectrum of good and bad. The goals are very precise. You must achieve this. You must achieve that. To go back to what we said in the last episode, our lives just are far more ambiguous as far as the goals than art. I mean, there's this article by Roger Ebert, and I don't want to crib it too hard, but can you explain it a little bit better, since you're the one who turned me on to this, about why he felt that video games were not an art form?
Well, okay, let's see if I can remember. He thinks video games aren't an art form because I don't know, why does he? I'm blanking
but
now.
Because he felt that film, which is his genre, and stories in general reveal something about the human experience. But he felt the ultimate, the purpose of films or stories are to reveal something of the human experience. He felt the purpose of video games were for people to make their goals, or to try to make their goals. So in video games, you win or you lose. You win a bit more than you won last game, but your goal is always the point. The intention of the experience is always to complete the goal of the game. Whereas the intention of the experience, and that's a paraphrase from me, is for watching, let's say, a film or reading a novel, is to learn something about what it's like to be human. And he would argue you don't really learn what it's like to be a human being or anything of the human experience simply by playing a video game, or if you do, it's only by default.
Right, and that's why great art is great art, as we've discussed, because the artist can transport their intellect into your head somehow, right?
Or
they're giving you their point of view
into your head. But if you've ever looked at a Jackson Pollock, it's very hard to know what Jackson Pollock was thinking or feeling when he threw a basketball against a piece of paint on a canvas. It might just be randomness.
You know what? It's funny you say that, Chris, because I think when I look at Jackson Pollock's, when I look at art that's that minimalistic and abstract, I feel like I do know what the artist is thinking. I mean, but then
he'd use the word "I feel," which means you're not 100% sure you're feeling, which is great. That's the point, I would argue, is that you're feeling your own interpretation. But when you play video games, how much of that do you feel?
Right. You're bringing up a great point, because a video game is a weird type of art that's, it's not pure art, right? It's more entertainment. And it's, you don't feel a connection with the people who made the game, right? I mean, I don't think those people...
I don't think that's the intention of the design. It's designed for a particular purpose, which is, I believe, to distract, it's designed to distract, right? It's designed to keep you sitting down playing for as long as possible,
Right.
so that you get the maximum play time out of the experience, and
And
you
I,
get the maximum amount of dopamine rush.
right.
I
And I
don't
think,
think when Shakespeare sat down to write, I'm sorry, I'm picking on Shakespeare. But when Shakespeare sat down to write Hamlet, I don't think he was really thinking, as long as Hamlet is, man, I really want to make sure people spend the most amount of time sitting in front of Hamlet and get the most amount of dopamine rush. I want this Hamlet to be as realistic and as immersive as possible. That's why, it's just, I want the sword fight scenes to just really make, man, that's really good stuff.
right. And,
I know I'm being a bit of a dick on this, but
no, I think this is a good point. I mean, we talked about this outside the show, but this whole idea of immersion that a lot of game designers are obsessed with, it's kind of like it's a silly notion, isn't it? I mean, they want you to feel physically immersed, but there is no emotional immersion, right? There's no.
I want to just, I'll be slightly devil's advocate and say, yes, I think they definitely want you to have an emotional experience, because if you don't have an emotional experience, you're not going to be engaged. And again, I've met people who design flames and clouds, and I do think there is an artistry to making the visual elements or the narrative elements or the theatrical, the acting elements. I do believe there is an artistry to all of those things and an emotional goal. But because the intention is still first and foremost for a very particular viewer, or it's for the experience of the gamer first and foremost, and in service of the gamer's experience, in the same way a couch is in the experience of the person who's going to sit on that couch, it really has to form into what I call a commercial art form, or an artisanship, or a craft, but not a fine art. Because at the day's end, as we keep on coming back to it, it's always about focus and intent. And it's weird, because I know you and we talked about this earlier, art museums are now having video games in their permanent collection. They now do exhibitions on video games. I know there's scholarships and grants. I know that video game is art is being taught. I know there are people who are making video games that are not even games as much as artistic journeys. I get that. I know even legally now, video games have protections that fall more into how we protect fine art. And I don't oppose any of that, Randall. I really don't. I just don't see personally the Mozart, the Shakespeare, the Picasso, the
masterpiece. Yeah,
that transcends the medium.
Right. I just want to say, yeah, I think we're on the same page on this. I mean, video games are definitely an art, but they're more of an entertainment form of art, right? They're not a sophisticated, pure form of art, like from the world of fine arts, for instance.
Right. Now, I will say, exactly. Now, in their defense, really, as a legitimate industry, they've only been around for about 45 years. And they have gone from being a small little niche to now being right up there with film and television and pop music as a dominant entertainment medium. And I would certainly say, if you look at the nascency of anything like radio or film or 20th century theater, a lot of it also was just in its time considered by the tastemakers as being folk art, not real art, as being outsider art, or being just commerce art, pop art. So it's certainly possible that one day someone will look at 2020's video games and say, this video game was not appreciated in its time, but it's great work. But don't you think that fine art, either, again, by intention or default, somehow lasts longer than commercial art, which is made for the moment?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's what makes art great, right? Just the test of time.
It's certainly one theory. It's certainly one theory of art. And if you make something only for the moment, and I feel like video games, even if, say, I know that the James Bond GoldenEye has now been running for like a long time. There are video games that have really been running now for 10 years. So clearly, yes, they're standing the test of time as video games, but they're not standing the test of time to the same way that,
Well, let me just say,
Man Rose, what was the famous Sunrise, which has now been around for almost 90 years.
talking about the silent film.
The silent film by F.W. Man Rose.
Yeah, that's an amazing movie, by the way, if you haven't seen it. But
or Abel Glance's Napoleon, right? Or Scott Joplin's Rag,
Well, video games, when they stick around and people describe them as masterworks or whatever, it's because of the gameplay. It's not because of the aesthetic experimentation or the aesthetic questions it asks or the emotions it invokes or its influence. Sometimes it's influence on other games, but usually not. It's usually just because they're really fun to play. They're really well done. Like there was this outfit called Rare, and I think they were based in the UK. They made the GoldenEye game.
Oh, well, that thing's been going on forever.
Right, and Rare was famous for playtesting their games forever before releasing them. That's why their games were so popular, so stood the test of time. Okay, so GoldenEye was playtested like forever, and then they released it, and people are still playing it, right?
And look, people are still playing Monopoly, and that's been around for almost 80 years. And people are still playing chess, and chess has been around for thousands of years. So there is nothing wrong with long-running games. Games can last forever, as I just proven it. But I still have a hard time to say that Monopoly or chess or baseball or any game is really a work of art and not a work of diversion.
Well, I would say they're art, but just not great art. Would you say that? I mean, like a fork is art,
sure,
right?
sure.
I mean,
There's
a couch is
skill,
art, right?
There's skill, there's knowledge, there's application. Sure, I'm being maybe a little bit too glib, but but I really want to say it's too easy even to get on the test of time argument and not get sidelined by this. I think the thing that is very key about Monopoly or gin rummy or chess or checkers or basketball or baseball and GoldenEye is that they fulfill a need in the human psyche for entertainment. They're pleasing and they're pleasurable. And not all of fine art is pleasing and pleasurable. And not all of fine art translates as well as those games do. Because I don't believe fine art was ever created to be solely pleasing and pleasurable or diverting. It's a byproduct at best. And video games don't serve that purpose. And do you think we'll ever see a point in history, Randall, where video games will create something that crosses over into fine art?
It's funny.
The Beatles of video games?
Well, yeah, now we're getting to this argument. We're getting to the arguments generated by Roger Ebert's original objections to the idea that video games were art, right? And I've noticed that, and he wrote that article a long time ago. It's been years now. And I noticed that a lot of those arguments have just died, and for years, I've always waited for the website that was going to just talk about the aesthetics of video games, right? And talk about video games as an art form. And, but it never appeared because no one cares about video games as an art form. People only care if video games are fun, right?
Well, all I can say is as video games tend to take up more and more of our entertainment landscape, as it replaces film and TV and novels as the dominant form of entertainment, as it brings people who are strangers together, as it brings families together, as it acts as an escapist place to be in a hard life, it's certainly possible that just by the theory of numbers and time and intellectual and creative energy being devoted to the industry, that something quite beautiful and transcendent will come. But I cannot personally see that.
Well, let me just say, I played way more video games than you. And when I was really into video games and playing them and loving them, I too was waiting for the the masterpiece, right, to be produced. And I remember when Metal Gear Solid came out for the PlayStation, and people were talking about that like it was going to be the masterpiece. And the funny thing about all these games, even Metal Gear Solid, the what is it, Kojima? I think the guy, the game
Yeah,
designer of
famous
Metal
guy.
Gear. He
Very famous.
he even you can read it on Wikipedia. He even thinks that video games aren't art, right? But
Yeah.
but Metal Gear Solid was incredibly ambitious, in terms of character and story. But the funny thing about it, even gameplay, but the funny thing about it is most players, when they play a game like that, they just skip over all the dialogue and get to the gameplay. So like how so how do you call that a masterpiece when people just like basically skip the masterpiece part? I mean, and that's the problem with video games. It's like uh, if you want video games to be artistic masterpieces, you basically have to take a game that's fun and then bolt on the artistic masterpiece part on top of it. That's the problem, because people don't care about that part. They care about the game part. And
that's fair.
and
And
I
there's
finally
no shame
realized
in
that.
Yeah, as they say, no shame in the game, right?
Right. I don't. There's not a problem with that, but it's like no one ever tried to argue like that chess was some sort of masterpiece, right? Or that football is an artistic masterpiece, right? I mean,
at best, what you will say of the Bobby Fishers or you will Gary Kasparovs, those are chess players, or of any champion athlete, is they bring an art to the game. They have such skill that's so innate that you can't even see where it comes from, and it changes our perception of the game in a beautiful way. And our people now, I guess, are video game athletes. People can watch video game players, but and I really want to be really clear. That's why the show is called Arts and Entertainment, because I'm not saying that entertainment is less valid than art, or that commercial art is less valid than fine art. I just feel like they serve different things. I will say, I know a couple, they met on a video game, they got married, they lost weight, they bicycle, happy story. I know families that play video games together. I'm not saying video games are bad for you. I'm just saying, for whatever reason, as Roger Ebert wrote, and I think as people try to fight against, video games, while they're at best a commercial experience and they're not a fine art experience.
Yeah,
Do you have any? Yeah, go on.
I just want to say this idea of video games as art, as time has gone on and the industry has become more mature, it's become less artistic. It's become less experimental, right? I mean, video games have gotten to be even more labor intensive than movies. And so the capital outlay for making a video game is even larger now than movies, I think. And that's just going to make them less artistic, right? Because the more money involved in an artwork of any kind, the less individualistic it'll be, or the fewer risks it'll take.
Certainly,
the larger an audience will have to please.
Yeah, in a commercial art form outing, where the goal is to make as much money as possible, the more money they spend, the more money they have to make in return. Just the mathematics alone. You're absolutely right.
And I am sure that most people who have played video games for years, like starting even in the Atari, even before the Atari, they would probably agree with me that video games as an art form have become less experimental as time has gone on. Right? I mean, the NES days were an incredible time for experimentation, I think. Even the pre-Atari 2600 days in the arcade. I mean, the kind of weird arcade games you used to find, I mean, you just don't see that anymore. But anyway, I don't know. I guess as a video game player, and I don't play as many video games as I used to, you wish you kind of like want video games to be great, right? But they at some point you just realize they're never going to be great art. But they're fun. I have no problem playing them and having fun, but they're just never going to be great art. And I mean, I used to have dreams. I think a lot of kids, when they're immersed in video games, they have dreams of growing up and being a game designer and making like the video game masterpiece. But I don't think it's possible anymore. And I think that was like a silly notion to begin with. And but you don't know it until you just see through the passage of time what happens with video games. I mean, how do you bolt on a human experience onto a gameplay mechanic? You know, it doesn't work. People don't care.
And, it's an interesting discussion for me because why I really keep on having to state, and I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, I have very little video game experience past 1981. And what little experience I have is just so anecdotal. But I love the fine arts, and I love commercial art. And I do go to museums, and I do look at installations where it is just commercial art. I have commercial art in the house. And I think it is, for me, a great pleasure and a great joy. But I think what was really nice about you bringing up this topic for me is you're asking me to look at something that I'm not really very knowledgeable in, except for the most superficial way, and trying to figure out, does this fall into, am I open enough to see it as fine art? The last thing I'm going to say is I remember a few years back, I was at the Whitney Museum, and I was at a retrospective on the works of Jeff Koons, who was a popular artist. Really hit his stride in the 90s with, you probably saw the Porcelain Michael Jackson. If not, Google it, Porcelain Michael Jackson. You'll see it.
Great work.
And Jeff Koons' career began first in the 80s. He did start out in graphic arts. And the first thing you see from his 80s is like, it's a Nike sneaker. It's like a sneaker. And he didn't design it or anything. It's just a sneaker. And there's a lot of other commercial products, and it's his comment on consumerism. And the work leaves me cold. I understand it's fine art, but it doesn't really, it's art is commentary. And then I guess by the time I get to the works that he's making in the 90s, where he really finds his métier, and he's working in porcelain, and he's making these giant toy-like disturbing creatures, or he's making paintings that are reflections of his emotional state by about his life, and he's going through a divorce and having child custody issues. Once his work becomes more individualistic and personal, the experience is really quite amazing. And a lot of people do not like it. A lot of people don't consider his work valid. A lot of people think all he's doing, even at the height of his work, is exactly what he was doing at the beginning, which is doing commentaries on consumerism, borrowing other people's forms. And in fact, all he is just a huckster, a populist who makes, basically cultural references for commercial appeal with nothing really truly of value to say. Now, because I sometimes feel a little alone he took like the Hulk and he puts like tubes on the back of the Hulk, I understand what it's like to find art in an artist's work that is controversial. I know what it's like for other people not to see what you see in them. And I have great sympathy for anybody who doesn't really agree with us and sees something. And again, my last request, this is the last I'm going to say, is just because I don't see the art form in it, I would be so open to just one person convincing me that I'm missing something like what I feel Jeff Koons is to contemporary 20th century art. Thank you so much for bringing this one up. Randall, any final thoughts?
No, I think that's it, Chris. We got it.
Well, then, thank you, everybody, for watching the show, listening to the show. Again, please comment. We really want to know what you think, and we'll do a follow-up. Until then, I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
And this has been Arts and Entertainment
with Chris and Randall.
Goodbye.
Bye.